Okay. How you doing? What's your name?
My name's Anita Kulp.
And today's date?
October the 1st, 2017.
Okay. Per our prior discussions here at the conference in New York, here in Syracuse, you had come to me this morning at breakfast. We were talking a little bit about your former husband and some of the things that ensued after an assassination attempt on him as a candidate for the presidency of the country of Cameroon in Africa. And so I think that's probably a good place to start with your testimony, and just kind of going to let you have the floor.
Okay.
Very interested to hear what you have to say about this.
Okay. I met Antoine through the internet, through a mutual friend, and we had an instant connection. And it was interesting because a friend of his, 6 months prior to my meeting him, had said to me out of the blue, he was from Cameroon, and he said to me out of the blue, "You know you're going to be the next First Lady of Cameroon." I was like, okay, put that on the shelf. Okay, yeah, right. Didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know anything at all. And 6 months later, I was introduced to Antoine, and within 10 days, he asked me to marry him. And within about 4 weeks, he was here in the United States. We met in person. We went back to Cameroon and spent 6 weeks so that I could get to see what the country was like, with the full intention and purposes for us to go back and to campaign for the 2011 presidential elections in Cameroon. We came back to the States. We spent about a month there, a month here, and then he went back to Mali to finish off some business, and I stayed in the U.S. and was in Georgetown, down in D.C. And then in December of 2007, we flew to Cameroon with the full intent and purpose to campaign to become President and First Lady of Cameroon. I would have been the first American First Lady in Africa. I went there because it felt like that was the thing I was supposed to do. My angels didn't stop me. I felt like this was where I really needed to be. This was what I was supposed to do, so I went there. And what I found was conditions that you can't even begin to imagine. The way that people are living, their mindset, where their focus and attention is. It was just unbelievable to me, coming from the United States, never really living in poverty, never really understanding how human beings could treat each other the way that they were treating each other. To make a long story short, we had to go to the port in Douala. I had to get my residence permit. And as you can imagine, there's only a couple of main roads from a lot of the different cities and towns and things. So we were in Douala at the police station, being extorted out of a lot of money so that I could actually get my residence permit. So they actually knew exactly where we were, and when we left Douala, we went straight back to Chung, which is where we were living in the village. And they knew exactly what time we left, so they knew exactly what time we would be approaching this one particular area where there was a river and a bridge, and it was about an hour outside of Douala. And we had hired a car, we had hired a driver, and we started approaching, and it was getting dark, and there was a truck in the middle of the road. It was just stopped right in the middle of the road. And on the right-hand side, there was also another truck that had been stopped. So what that meant was all the cars had to be funneled around the left-hand side of this truck that was in the middle of the road. And so we were in a line of cars, and we inched around on the left-hand side of this truck. And what came barreling down, right, really barreling down on the side of us was a big tanker truck. And it went out of control. It actually killed someone. There was a man that was on the side of the road, and he was killed instantly. The truck turned over, and it was right at where the bridge and the river was. I thought, wow, that's really kind of weird. We get around. We get past the bridge, and the next thing we know, the police motioned for us to pull over. And they weren't asking everybody to pull over, but they were motioning, they had us stop on the side of the road. And all they wanted to do was to know who was in the car. They didn't try to extort any money out of us, which was not possible. They didn't look at the papers for the car. They didn't look at the papers for the driver. They didn't look at our passports. All they wanted to know was who was in the car. I thought, this is really kind of weird. We went back to Chung, and we talked a little bit about it. It just seemed this very surreal experience. I didn't really understand what was going on. But anyway, about 3 weeks later, we had some friends that were part of what they call the secret police. And it was actually confirmed to us by them that in fact it was an assassination attempt. So obviously we were doing something right because they wanted us gone, my husband at the time. And they wanted us gone. And that was when it really hit me that, oh my God, this is surreal. But this was my life. This is what happened. I let my mother know. She was back here in the States. And I let my mom know about 30 days later because I didn't want her to be worried. And the minute that she found out, she called the State Department. And it didn't take them very long. The very next day, the United States State Department got in touch with me in Chung. And within 10 days, I was taken out of Cameroon. I knew that if I had gone through Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport, I would have disappeared. They would have killed me.
And that's due to an influence that France has in that country.
France has a stranglehold on all of West Africa. And what I've come to understand, living with a presidential candidate, I began to very deeply understand a lot of the issues surrounding colonization and the stranglehold that France still has to this day. They control the monetary supply. That's how they control the country. The current dictator, Mr. President Paul Biya, has been in power for many, many years, and he does nothing without ensuring that he gets his direction from the French. That's just how it works.
Which you guys had, evidently not conceded to yourselves. That's just something, to find yourself in a position as certainly the first American First Lady in Africa is a very interesting place to find yourself. And also a very pivotal position when we look at the issues that are facing humanity today. One of the biggest national security concerns of the future actually is the race card in Africa, the race card being applied to our own situation, the dynamics at play here in the United States. But even as the world becomes to grow smaller, this becomes an increasingly encroaching issue on all sides. But beyond that, certainly in Africa being a threat, so many different factors there, infrastructure, there's a lot to take from there. And these people treated in such a way in this third world context, like you said, you can't relate to something like this if you have not experienced it. And so I think that's a really interesting place for you to find yourself, because my initial kind of how I surmised your situation, just given with the situations I've been in, which is all I could go by, is that somehow you had been forced in that situation, that somehow, and it seems opposite of that to me at this point. It seems like, you mentioned your angels and all these things. I'd like to hear you talk about that too. I know you wanted to talk about the spiritual aspects of this as well. And that's really important, because that's what we're really trying to focus on, how we're going to create in our environment, all these things. Where do we go from here in that story for you?
Well,
I hate to have interjected, but it's just, this is a really interesting situation with you.
Where do we go from here? Let me think my train of thought.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Let's see. I'm very clear. I was very clear at the time that I felt that looking through the lens as a filter of my life, through the lens of being First Lady, that I had been prepared. I had been completely prepared. I know a lot about different kinds of technologies, agriculture, power, medicine, a lot of different kinds of technologies that would have aided my brothers and sisters in Africa. And I felt that this was my place. I felt that this was what I was meant to do. And it made sense to me. The first initial comment of someone throwing that out at me randomly, you realize that you'll be the next First Lady of Cameroon, seemed ludicrous and absurd. But I think it was a seed that had been planted, and it was after that then I met Antoine, and then all of these things ensued. I did come back to the U.S., and I'll just kind of finish that part of the story. I came back to the United States. I had to leave. Antoine was in Cameroon, and I came back to the U.S., and I was really pretty drained. I was pretty almost dead. I was in a very dark hole when I came back. From a spiritual perspective, what I knew was that I'm capable of holding a tremendous amount of light. And at the moment, there's so much darkness on the dark continent. And I felt that I really could, from a physical perspective, I really would have been an excellent First Lady because I really understand the issues. And I would have had the know-how and the guidance to bring the resources necessary that really could have made a difference. And in countries such as Cameroon and in other African nations in particular, unless you're in a position of power, you can't get anything accomplished. So my full intention to go there and to be First Lady was really about being in a position to finally get something done. Otherwise, you get nothing done. It just doesn't. Nothing happens. There's so much corruption. It's on every single level. And I was a white American woman, a white blonde American woman in Africa, and most of the people were angry. They were just really angry when they couldn't extort money from me. So I had my husband would call for a taxi, and the taxi cab driver would see that I'm there waiting to get in the taxi, and they would charge me 4 times what they would charge him. And this just went on and on and on. So, but my story really begins, I can remember back when I was about 4 years old, and we lived in an apartment, and above us was a Masonic lodge. And I can remember opening the door and watching the men go past our apartment down the hall and up into the next floor of the Masonic lodge. I don't have memory of my childhood. It's just not there. It's not there. It just doesn't exist. When I was about 30 years old, I realized that I was having a lot of difficulty in relationships, and I really couldn't understand why. It just seemed I had these same patterns kept coming over and over again. And so I was in San Francisco at the time. I had just moved to San Francisco, and at the time I started doing Codependence Anonymous because I wanted to get a handle on why my life was such a mess. I didn't get it. So that was really the entry point for me to begin to awaken to, wow, there's something else going on here. And so I did the 12 steps, and I did I did the work. I really did a lot of inner work, and I worked with a counselor at the time. And the first thing that I came to was the sexual abuse. That was the first layer. And so I was able to work on that through my 12-step program as well as with my counselor. After about 1.5 years or so, I got to the satanic ritual abuse because I began to have flashbacks. And the counselor that I was working with said that she knew right from the day that I walked in that that's where we would eventually get to. So you can imagine I was in my early 30s, and I, again, did a lot of work. I did a lot of work on myself. I tried to make some sense out of what really had happened to me in my life. When I was 16 years old, I actually left home. I was living in England, and I left my family. I left everything. I didn't know really why. I just knew I couldn't be there anymore. So I've been very independent from a very, very early age. So after I kind of came to grips with the satanic ritual abuse, I did confront it was on the phone because I was in California. I did confront my parents. Of course, my mother denied it. My father just kind of went off, and they didn't want to hear anything about it. So I have, for the last number of years, thought that I had dealt with all these things that had happened to me as a young person. And it was ironic, but when the singer, Prince Rogers Nelson, passed, it was like a light bulb went off. And I was consumed with trying to find out. What tweaked my brain is that he was a Jehovah's Witness when he passed away. And I couldn't understand why he was. It just tweaked my brain. I couldn't get it. But that led me down into some really interesting areas, and I didn't really know much about the entertainment industry. I've never really been around it. I don't listen to a lot of modern songs, but I could see videos were just distorted and bizarre, and didn't. So I began to understand the satanic nature of the ritualistic nature of what's really been going on in the entertainment industry. And then that kind of led me into a whole realm of beginning to understand, oh, wow, there's what the term that's used for super soldiers. And so I started investigating, well, what is all of that? And what might that have to do with me, or if anything at all? And it just led me into a deeper understanding of the multidimensional nature of all of what we see as reality. It became really apparent to me that there were certain things in my life that I was not permitted to do. I never was permitted. I could never astral travel. I never understood why. I'm a deeply spiritual person, why I was not allowed to astral travel, but it never happened. And so I really began to see a much broader picture of what the nature of our reality is really all about. I've done a lot of study and understanding that there's so many overlays over this planet. There's so many overlays over humanity. And it's kind of like cracking, you're cracking open the shell. You're beginning to really understand, wow, what we see, feel, and touch is a purely illusion. It's just not even real. And there's so many facets to the ruling families. Well, they're kind of the lower hierarchy in this whole whole understanding of the nature of what really is going on here on this planet. Why is the focus on this gemstone called Earth in this particular part of our Milky Way galaxy? So there's a lot of things that I've really begun to understand, a lot of which has to do with the fact that when I first came back from Africa, it was 2009, and in 2011 there was sounds in my head, and they just started one day. And they were so loud and so intense that for about 2 years I couldn't function. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand. I tried for a number of years to find, my prayer had always been, help me to find the root cause of this. And that led me into a lot of different kinds of healing traditions. I've looked at this from a spiritual perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a physical perspective, from a physiological perspective, to try to heal these sounds in my head. I refuse to call it what the doctors want to call it, because I just refuse to use that word. And I don't have it, but I've been working.
What word was that? Is that a psychological?
Tinnitus.
Tinnitus. Okay.
Tinnitus.
Okay.
So I don't.
A lot of different causes of that.
Yeah. Well,
it's a broad term that they like to play things off of, certainly.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as I've gotten a little stronger and I've gotten a little healthier, the volume and the intensity has continued to diminish. I still deal with it on a daily basis. Sometimes it's a little worse and sometimes it's not. I think it has a lot more to do with my vibration and frequency than anything else. I've learned some shielding techniques that also helped me to understand, and I finally came to an understanding about 6 years after this all began, the beginning part of this year, that I'm targeted. I'm a targeted individual.
By who? On what basis? How does that play out for you?
It's the only thing that really makes sense for me. I've gone through every other possible reason, possible origin, and then when I look back at the rest of my life and I know who I am from a spiritual perspective, it finally made sense. I started seeing this word, targeted individual, and it's like, I ignored it for a little while, and then all of a sudden it's like it resonated, and it's like, okay, that's what makes sense. Finally, something, either there's something in me or there's something that's being directed at me. Whatever it is, it's a frequency generation of some description.
Is it possible that it could be both of those things? Because,
sure.
When you having said all of what you just said and that you've singled out, is there the manpower out there to do something like that for your whole life, essentially, is what you're saying? Just specifically for you, or is there some other type of stimulus in the environment that is causing that for you?
It's not a natural stimulus. That I'm absolutely certain of, because
I
I narrowed out everything. I eliminated thing after thing after thing after thing.
But
So,
neither is it somebody sitting up the street in a van.
No.
Maybe it could have been at some point in time for whatever reason, but
No.
that's not what you're talking about here.
That's not what I'm talking about.
All right.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. And exactly how and what process is being used in my particular individual case, I couldn't tell you. But what I do know is that there are technologies out there that can read my biosignature.
That's what we call bioencoding. You can really thank Richard Sargoza for that, and also Catherine August, and myself, and Candy. Richard really pointed me in the right direction of this. His targeting is some of the worst I've ever seen, and it's on the same basis that I would say that is in pretty much everybody's case at this point, and that is a genetic-specific targeting through the resonance signature of the DNA.
Yeah.
And this technology is incorporated into the existing infrastructure as far as communications, smart grid, in general. That stuff is there.
Yeah, everything.
And so, wow.
It's just been my own. I'm very guided and I'm very protected, and I live my life, and I've come to my conclusions based upon my own personal experience. Information comes to me when I need it. I am always taken to the best. It doesn't matter if it's a photography school or if it's an art teacher or a therapist or a new protocol. Whatever it is, I am absolutely confident, because I've seen this over and over and over in my life. I am taken to the best.
It's a humbling thing to say or to hear from you when with us here.
That's the truth.
That's an honor for, I think, anybody in here with us right now, and presumably anybody who may ever see this. I think that your testimony is very strong. What are the ways to overcome this in the future for what you see based on what you know?
In my case, what I've been able to suss out so far is that this is a spiritual battle, and it's a battle of frequency, a battle of will and a battle of frequency. And to me, the most powerful way for me to heal and come back, because I'm not going to go against something. That just gives energies to whatever I'm focusing against. So I withdraw my energy from that. For me to heal myself is to use energy medicine, to use frequency. That's what will heal me, because that's what's being directed at me.
Let me ask you about choice and how your choice, as it pertains to the future. Is the future something that is deterministic, predestined in your view, or how does our choice in service to others ultimately choose a path that opens up this realm of potentiality to perpetuate a positive timeline versus something else? Or how do your choices affect the future, to be simple?
We're in choice in every single moment. And every single moment that we choose something positive, we're perpetuating a better future, a more positive future. What my choices today are and how they will affect my personal future in 6 months, I don't have a clue. I don't try to go out, 6 months or a year or what have you. What I know today is I've been brought here. I've been brought to this conference. I have been gifted with this incredible gift of how I can clear myself, how I can use frequency medicine, and how I can get stronger and how I can get healthier. For me, that's all I know. Where that takes me, I don't know. What I do know is that my guidance, my angels, my guardians will guide me as to what my next steps are.
Are you able to see how the fundamental principles of something like the clearing protocol with the sound, the motions, and the acupressure and the hitting of specific energy points in the body can have an effect in your environment beyond just the effect that it has in your own personal body? Are you able to begin to quantify a sense of that data in your environment to see how you can express it in so many different forms?
Well,
what does that look like to you?
I'm already very, very aware that my energy field doesn't stop here. My energy field is expanded out around me. So what that means is that anyone that I come into contact with or my immediate environment is going to be impacted because I'm an energy being. We're all energy beings. This physical body is not the end of me. My influence through my own fields can be as great as 55 feet. I mean, we all have this capacity. And when we're able to bring in more light and be very conscious in what our choices are on a daily basis, in a moment-by-moment basis, that's how we plot out a more positive future, is every single choice that we make.
So when you say that it's not a natural stimulus that you had in your environment, it's an artificial stimulus by your own account.
Absolutely.
How do we discern that influence and make choices appropriately based on the fact that artificial stimulus is there? What are ways in which you see that and identify it and then will not play into it as a result of actually just the act of that acknowledgement enables us to take those first steps to counteracting this system? What does that feel like for you?
I think for every single human being on the planet, we have to start by getting out of here and going into here. The answers are all in here. Our connection to spirit is here. Our connection to God, spirit, the Tao, whatever you want to call that greater force in this universe that created all. When you go within and and you ask for guidance, I don't care if you're talking about prayer, I don't care if you're talking about meditation, whatever form of getting quiet and going into that heart space is a very conscious choice. And from there, everyone who asks those questions will get their answers and what their path is and what their way is, and they'll be guided and directed.
Is that to say that truth is layered for everyone, no matter what? Like an onion, you get down, there's no pit, it's done. It's the same thing throughout, or is that still leave space open from your perspective that there are these things? You could call it truth, the highest truth, if you want, whatever terms you want to put it in. But what is that double-edged sword underneath it all? Is there something that is irrelevant to your perception, irrelevant to the collective perception? What does it look like when we get down to the point that the fundamental things that we adhere to, regardless of agreement or acknowledgement? What is that? Is that a real tangible thing, or is it always layered? What is it?
I am still in the layers, so I can't see beyond where I'm at right now. I can imagine, I can theorize, I can,
That's an honest answer. Yeah,
right
good
now,
answer.
I'm right in the layers, so I can't answer that.
I think we've got Lori here wants to ask a question. She's asked to jump in there.
Okay.
Hi, Anita. Thank you for sharing your testimony. I just wanted to ask, when your mother called the State Department, did she call as an ordinary citizen?
Yes,
And they brought you home?
and they brought me home.
I was going to ask you a bit about that too, kind of what that looked like. I didn't want to interrupt, but that sounds kind of,
She
like some spy stuff going on.
she
Yeah,
can
what's
see
going on?
my mother, God bless her, she's saved my life twice. That was once. There was another time in my life I had surgery, and I had a tonsillectomy, and my vein burst, and she was going to the airport and came back, and luckily she did, because I was bleeding. My vein had burst, and I would have bled out, and I would have bled out on the full floor in like minutes. But there was some part of her that knew and came back. They were on their way my father and mother were on their way to the airport, and they came back. So she called as an ordinary citizen. She had seen there were some hikers and backpackers in some other parts of the world that had gotten stuck, and the State Department intervened, and so she thought, well, if they can do that for them, then they can do that for my daughter and get my daughter home. So she called, and she just was insistent and got to the right people, and it was within 12 hours they were in touch with me in Cameroon.
Wow. And so did they have to kind of smuggle you out of there, or did they make their presence felt when they come to get you? Or?
No, I had to make my way to Yaoundé, and I had to stay in Yaoundé while all the paperwork was
Go to an
done.
embassy?
At the U.S. Embassy.
Okay.
We didn't stay at the U.S. Embassy, but I had to spend a lot of hours there getting all of the paperwork
Did they keep
done.
you protected?